Look, I like Lindsey. I don't care what he says, okay?
The Democratic Convention generated a lot of energy this week. Millions of viewers tuned in, a bit more than tuned into the Republican convention. It was disciplined. It was well produced. It conveyed patriotism and unity. The Harris campaign says it's raised an eye-popping $540.
Republican senator and well-known Trump sycophant Lindsey Graham was publicly humiliated today on live TV by a triple combination of CNN's Jake Tapper, his own cult leader Donald Trump, and Graham himself. And we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells. Before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. Lindsey Graham is someone that we make fun of here quite a bit at Pondering Politics, and I encourage the rest of you to take that attitude and bring forth into the world. Make sure you pro-soul ties. Lindsey Graham is a sick offin. He is a coward. He is an unprincipled loser who is prone to emotional outbursts on TV. This is a man who styles himself as a conservative Republican, who was an outspoken critic of Donald Trump during the 2015-2016 election campaign. And then, as soon as Donald Trump locked up the nomination, he turned tail and just subordinated all of his principles and past positions to Trump for the sake of political expediency. And yet, that doesn't seem to be giving him any favors with Donald Trump. So recently, Graham criticized Trump publicly. He said, listen, you know, you need to stay away from personal attacks and really campaign on policy. That's how you'll win well. During an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper. Tapper reminded Graham of that and then pointed out that Donald Trump publicly responded to Graham's advice, and the whole thing was humiliating.
You said last week that, quote, Donald Trump, the provocateur, the showman, may not win this election, unquote, urging that he focuses more on policies the way that you are in this interview. Mr. Trump responded to you. Take a listen.
Yeah. Look, I like Lindsey. I don't care what he says, okay? Lindsey wouldn't have been elected if I didn't endorse him. So, you know, South Carolina, Lindsey's my friend, but if I didn't endorse him, he would have had no chance of getting elected.
I like Lindsey. I don't care what he says, the president says. He doesn't seem receptive to your advice.
Well, I talked to him a couple of days ago. Now, all I can say is that President Trump, when he was president of our country, we had the most secure border in 40 years. Gas was at $1.87. Russia wasn't invading Ukraine. The Arabs were making peace with the Israelis. He's got a lot to be proud of.
So you see, Lindsey Graham was publicly humiliated by Jake Tapper by playing a clip of Donald Trump, publicly humiliating Lindsey Graham. And this is the best Lindsey Graham can do, was kind of a chuckle looking down. You can see his face is red. He's clearly embarrassed, but he's too much of a spineless coward to actually push back pretty pathetic stuff. This guy used to be the best friend of John McCain, with whom I had enormous political disagreements, policy disagreements, but was a statesman and was a veteran and was a man of principle. Even if I disagree with many of the principles, and now, in McCain's absence, he's completely subordinated himself to an unprincipled, ideologically inconsistent populist like Donald Trump, who, by the way, routinely, in life and after his death, mocked John McCain and his service. So I think what Tapper did there was really good. I'm not saying that this is why he did it, but it had the unintended effect of reminding the American people to Lindsey Graham's face just how pathetic he is. And he really is pathetic. But that clip aside, there were other interesting parts of the interview as well. We're going to play some of those clips and unpack them together.
The Democratic Convention generated a lot of energy this week. Millions of viewers tuned in, a bit more than tuned into the Republican convention. It was disciplined. It was well produced. It conveyed patriotism and unity. The Harris campaign says it's raised an eye-popping $540 million in 35 days. You are as close to Donald Trump as anyone. Is what he saw this week making him and his campaign nervous at all?
Well, I didn't see what you saw. If you're a Republican, you saw a hate fest. You saw a hate fest full of insults. And Donald Trump said to Barack Obama, "You're a nice man," after President Obama, you know, insulted and jabbed President Trump continuously. It was designed.
So that's Lindsey Graham, known supporter of Donald Trump, the least civil and least kind political actor in modern politics. A guy who says, I like Lindsey, but I don't care what he says. Lindsey's my friend, but I don't care what he says. Imagine liking someone caring enough about them to call them your friend. Obviously, Trump doesn't believe that. But let's just take his words of face value. You say you like someone. You say they're your friend, but also you don't care what they say. These things are mutually exclusive, they're incongruous, and yet Lindsey Graham continues to tie himself in knots to defend Trump. Trump, who was the architect of the birther conspiracy that plagued President Obama's candidacy and his presidency, this idea that he wasn't an actual American citizen, that he, was born in a different country and was some sort of radical jihadist or, whatever. Just these things which really attack the core of President Obama's identity. Well, now he's being nice to Barack Ob. Ignore all the terrible things that Trump has said about President Obama in the past. Now he's saying he's a nice man, and therefore President Obama shouldn't insult Donald Trump, shouldn't respond in kind to Donald Trump. And it's really wrong. This is what I mean when I talk about how utterly snowflake the MAGA movement is. They think that they have the right, they have the entitlement to insult and denigrate you. You people you care about with impunity. Liberals, progressives, people in blue cities, blue states, women minorities, marginalized groups, the LGBTQ community, the press, whatever. Democrats, they can insult you whenever they want, wherever they want about whatever they want. But you can't give them a fraction of it in return. You can't match that energy at all. If you say one bad thing about them, you're being the incivil, the ones this deserves. Again, nothing but contempt. Lindsey Graham should be relentlessly made fun of and called out for his hypocrisy for this. He should be mocked. I really believe that. I genuinely believe that these Republican politicians who clutch their pearls and beg for civility should be made fun of relentlessly and said, hey, listen, if you want civility back in politics, your first obligation is to condemn, in no uncertain terms publicly, the rhetoric of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Lindsey Graham. If you want to complain about President Obama making a dick joke about Donald Trump after all these years of abuse and harsh rhetoric from Trump against Obama, you're first before you do anything. Your obligation before we even entertain the request is for you to come out and say, Donald Trump is awful. Donald Trump's rhetoric is awful. It's objectively worse than anything we hear from any Democrat. Even though I agree with Trump on the policies, you can add all that fluff in. But that you have to acknowledge that his rhetoric is objectively far worse than any Democrat. And that, because you really want civility restored to politics in a sense of decorum, you feel the moral compulsion to first condemn the person in your own party who's objectively worse than anyone in the opposition party. Biblically, because Graham claims to be Christian, you must remove the log from your own eye before talking about the splinter in the opposition. But of course, Graham won't do that, because again, he's an unprincipled coward and a loser who should be made fun of. But it's pretty pathetic stuff that we should not entertain seriously. Another clip. And the topic turns to reproductive rights, and Donald Trump's half-assed rhetorical pivot in that direction.
Let's turn to another important issue in this election, abortion. Former President Trump made some news the other night. He posted on Truth Social, quote, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights," unquote. That's language that obviously sounds kind of the left.
Yeah.
The top editor of the conservative National Review said, quote, "Trump's abandonment of pro-lifers is complete," unquote. Family Research Council President Tony Perkins said Trump is going to suppress his own supporters and, quote, "My advice is when you're in a hole, stop digging," unquote. What exactly is Donald Trump going to do to, quote unquote, help women's reproductive rights?
Yeah, no, you need to ask him about that. What I would say is that President Trump was a very good pro-life president. His position now, as I understand it, is that he's going to leave the abortion issue to the states. He doesn't believe there's a role for the federal government.
So note that Lindsey Graham, who considers himself one of Donald Trump's closest allies, a surrogate for the Trump campaign, says he doesn't know what the hell Donald Trump is talking about. I don't know what he means by that. You should ask him about that. Aren't you a surrogate for the campaign, sir? Aren't you? Not only a member of the same political party. Aren't you not only an elected Republican? Aren't you not only a close ally of Trump, but you are an official Trump surrogate going out and spreading the word, the good news, if there is any, about a Trump presidency. But you don't know what Donald Trump means when he's going to, support reproductive rights and women. and a way that terrifies your evangelical, conservative base? Could it be that Donald Trump is again an ideologically inconsistent populist who will say whatever the hell he wants, whenever he wants? Even if there are complete and total contradictions in order to gain a political edge, could it be that Trump is savvy enough to recognize that he is the dog that caught the car with respect to abortion and has suffered electorally an election and after election in multiple jurisdictions that Republicans, quite frankly, had no business losing, but they did anyway? And so he'll say something on Tuesday that completely contradicts his words and actions on Monday, and he doesn't mean any of it, and people are rightly confused by it. That's really what it is. But again, Lindsey Graham is caught flat-footed on this. He has no satisfying answer, and he's just like, well, he's a strong pro-life president. Okay, well then what the hell does he mean by this, and is this just anything other than a transparent attempt to court moderates? Yeah, pretty weak and pathetic stuff. There's another clip here. I guess we will play it. It concerns Donald Trump's flirtation with January 6 defendants and convicted felons. We'll talk about that.
Two pro-Trump organizations are hosting a January 6 awards gala at the Trump National Golf Course in Bedminster, New Jersey next Tuesday. The event is supposed to pay tribute to all January 6 defendants and raise money for these defendants and, in many cases, convicted criminals who assaulted the Capitol, assaulted law enforcement. Now, the Trump campaign says Donald Trump is not attending, although the organizers say they expect him to attend and he's on the invitation as an invited guest. Do you think it would be a mistake for him to go? And is it a mistake for this event to be taking place at Bedminster at all?
Well, my view of January 6th, I was actually there, that the people who broke into the Capitol and assaulted police officers should go to jail. They committed a crime. There are people very upset about the outcome of the 2020 election. I get that. But Vice President Harris tried to raise bail money for people who burned Minneapolis. I didn't like that either.
So again, the false equivalence here, Vice President Harris, when she was Senator Harris, retweeted support for the Minneapolis Bail Fund, which is a generic catch-all bail fund for people who are arrested who could not afford bail. It was not for protesters in Minneapolis. Specifically, it was certainly not for rioters. In Minneapolis specifically, it was a generic bail fund for those who could not afford bail, who were arrested. Vice President Harris, when she was senator, condemn the riots, condemn the violence. So what Lindsey Graham wants you to believe is, well, because she supported raising bail funds, just retweeted support for a bail fund, some of whose funds might have gone to people arrested in Minneapolis for protesting the murder of George Floyd. That is the equivalent of Donald Trump, repeatedly saying that he would pardon January 6 defendants, very often never distinguishing which ones he'd pardon, which ones he wouldn't, sometimes stating or suggesting that it would be a blanket pardon and allowing his personal property, his club, his resort to host a January 6th awards gala, celebrating the insurrection. This is what Republicans do. They engage in false equivalence no matter what your interpretation is of what the vice president did when she was senator. Even in its worst interpretation, it's just objectively orders of magnitude less offensive and less problematic than what Trump is doing here, but again, Lindsey Graham is much too cowardly to condemn it. So folks, I don't know. I love seeing Republican politicians, fight amongst themselves and eat their own. And I think it's hilarious that Lindsey Graham on national television was humiliated to his face by Donald Trump, by Jake Tapper, and quite frankly, by his own weak responses. What an utterly contemptible man. Let me know what you think in the comments.